it over to Dr.
Thank you, everyone, for having me this afternoon in the US and this evening in the UK. I'm glad we're here joined together to talk about this important topic. I'm going to share my screen. Hopefully, you'll be able to see that. So yes, Father has asked me to speak about resilient relationships, and we have talked about resilience in the past. We'll cover it again today as well as it relates to couples. And the things that we will talk about today are important for couples, but there are also important things in here related to just families in general. And we can come back another time and also talk about the love languages, which are also important as well. I can show a couple slides of those at the end. But, you know, any type of relationship is going to require sacrifice and kindness to one another and communication, and we'll address all these as well. So while we're focusing on couples in particular, this can be applied to several other folks also. So we've talked about resilience in the past because adversity is generally a part of life. At times we feel a lot of struggle and adversity. Sometimes we feel like we're carrying the weight of the world on our shoulders and everything is very heavy. And this is why resilience is important, because sometimes those stresses can come into our relationships as well and make them feel like they're very stressful and very difficult. Stress in general is something that can come from good things, believe it or not, as well as difficult things. So when we have stressful experiences, they can come from pleasant things. Say you've gotten a promotion and now you have more responsibilities. That can also produce stress, even though it is a good thing that has happened in your life and in your family's life. Stress can also come from difficult experiences. Say you have lost your job or had some other challenge in your family. That can also create a lot of stress as well. But stress is any time that there is a demand that is placed on us and it requires us to adjust our behavior in some way. So this adjustment, we can either respond to stress through adjustment and use coping skills and use spiritual and psychological tools to help us to adjust, or we can maladjust and not use the right tools or the right things to appropriately react to the demands that we have in our life and our stress. But we've probably shown this in previous presentations that I've done, that not all stress is damaging and not all stress is difficult. Stress can be something that can be a motivator. It can help us to remain focused. And these are times usually when we do have good support systems and good coping mechanisms in place, both spiritual and psychological, that will keep that stress manageable. However, if that stress becomes overwhelming, if we don't have enough coping skills, if we don't have enough structures in our life that can help us to deal with it, that's when stress turns into this orange and red zone where we feel fatigued, exhausted, panicked, angry or anxious, and then eventually burned out. And this can occur on an individual level, or it can occur in a relationship level. And so we have to focus on keeping and maintaining our coping skills in order to not get to this level of stress. And so when there is stress, it distorts the messages that we have in our mind, that we're not important, that we're shameful, that we're unwanted, that somebody doesn't love us, that we're all alone and helpless and can't fix the problem. And we may show the world on the outside that we're okay, but we may feel really stressed on the inside. And so I've also shown this before in that we can have physical reactions to our stressors. There can be signs of stress that are physical in nature, or feeling in nature, or behavioral or thinking in nature. And so this is what some of those kind of look like. People can have headaches or frequent infections or things like that, or excessive fatigue as a sign of their stress. They may have excessive worrying or muddled thinking, or kinds of stressors that they have. They can't make good decisions. they have a loss of confidence. They may feel depressed or have no emotions at all. They may be almost numb in their emotions, and they may be more accident prone or more restless, or maybe even turn to substances in order to deal with their stressors. Obviously, all these are signs that we need to get some additional support and some additional help, and that can be useful as well. So our goal today is to talk about ways to move away from carrying the weight of the world on our shoulders to be more resilient in our relationships. And we'll talk about what resilience means as well. And this is important because research that from over 50 years ago now tells us that the more stressors that we have in our life, it can impact our health as well. And so these psychologists and psychiatrists back in the 60s did some studies and labeled with numbers the most extreme stressors that people are experiencing. And they found in a study of over 5,000 patients that if you have a score of over 300 points on this list of stressors, you are more susceptible to illness than people that don't have this excessive stress level. So of course it impacts our relationship. It also impacts our health, which also in turn impacts our relationships. And so it's really important to keep our stressors at bay and focus on getting them to be maintained and to be managed. Of course, when we have any kind of threat in our life, we can meet it with resilience. And resilience comes from things that obviously apply to this talk. Resilience can come from maintaining our spirituality, self-regulating through beneficial and meaningful work, and through our love and friendships that we have. So through relationships, we can actually do a lot to keep at bay the stressors that come from transient or from chronic means. And research tells us that everybody at some point or another will experience a stress that is either chronic and long-term or short-term and transient. And the more that we are able to balance the several areas of our life, which include relationships that are listed there, social and emotional things, then we tend to be healthier. So the issue is that we anticipate for when good things are about to happen, but we don't anticipate for the roadblocks or the challenges that are going to come. So we plan for things like graduations and weddings and showers and things like that, but we don't necessarily focus on what to do when there is a stressor and a challenge, and stressors and challenges do come. And so we know that challenges come. The Bible even talks about you may have peace, that in this world there is trouble, but take heart, I have overcome the world. So we know there's going to be tribulations. We know there are going to be challenges, but how do we apply that to our relationships? Do we bend or do we break when there are difficulties and challenges ahead? Tough times do one of two things. They either reshape our relationships or they can break us. So if we're not bending, if we're not flexible, if we're not focusing on solutions, that those difficulties can easily break us. So let's talk about how people respond to stressors. They can either respond to a stressor by giving into that stressor and succumbing to it, and their functioning may become impaired. They may survive and continue to function the way that they were before the stressor happened, and therefore they haven't really learned much. And they can actually be impaired as they're still functioning. Some people will, in their relationships or even individually, will drop below where the baseline was initially, and then they will return to that baseline and stay there. Hopefully by the end of today's talk, we will figure out a way to prosper beyond the original level of functioning when that stressor occurred. So many of the factors that can come into play that occur are things like our biological makeup, but it also has to do with things like our personality, how we process information, our love languages in this case, and all of these things can help us to create more resilience in our relationships, because resilience will act like a chain reaction. Once it starts, it will keep going. So hopefully again by today, we'll learn how to be more resilient, and we want to overcome these difficulties with both the strength of our mind and also using our faith. And then we want to apply this to our relationships. How can we become more resilient in our relationships? So the point of the rest of the talk today, that was just a brief overview on resilience, and we'll cover it again at the end. But what is the point of being married when there is sometimes challenges and communication difficulties and not really understanding each other? Why do we need to be married. Why does God think that this is a good system to have? So what does a healthy marriage look like, and what are the benefits of it? What are some of the problems that can come up in marriages? There are definitely different roles for husbands and wives. That doesn't mean that they're not equal. They're equal but different. And the roles of the spouses in the building of the family, which we call a small church. And what does intimacy have to do with any of this? And in a Christian home, what do you do if there's not a Proverbs 31 wife or a Christ-centered husband? And how do we create resilient couples so that there can be resilient families? So when there are two people in a relationship, they are created in the image of God, and they are joined together for many different purposes. And those purposes are mostly to fulfill God's calling on our lives, to build each other up so that we can reach our highest potential individually, but also together, to help each other, to serve God, and to help each other reach again our highest spiritual potential. So this is supposed to be a place of holiness and helping each other reach the kingdom at some point. And so it's a spiritual potential ultimately that we are looking for. And a godly marriage is something that will stand the test of time. Yes, challenges will come. Like I said, the Bible says that there will be tribulations, and those tribulations are almost inevitable, but it does not change based the relationship should not change based on the changes in their lives or personal problems that arise. It should not be something that is based on selfishness. It should not be something that is based on, just waxing and waning with the difficulties and the challenges of life. It should be a relationship that mirrors the relationship between God and the church. And therefore, if that is what we truly believe and strive for, it should be a relationship of sacrifice, of love, and of service to one another and ultimately to God, of course. So we know that when there is a ring that you're trying to buy, or you're looking at a diamond ring, for example, you're looking at things like color and carats and quality and all of these things. And so if you're looking at the 4 C's of a godly marriage, you are looking at Christ being the center, being committed to one another, even through the ups and downs, communicating regularly and openly about things that are a part of the family, but also about needs and about things that are important to you. There's also talking about compassion and being compassionate to one another, and being kind, because at times not everybody is going to feel up to their best, and we need to be compassionate to each other when those things happen. A godly marriage is written in the Gospel according to St. Mark chapter 10. For this reason, a man should leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and the two will be one flesh. And therefore, what God has joined together, let no man separate. And so again, in these types of relationships, the ultimate goal is spiritual holiness and spiritual building up. So what's the point of these relationships? What's the point of getting married? The Bible lists a lot of these right from the beginning. In Genesis 2, it talks a lot about it's not good for a person to be alone, right from the 2nd chapter. So this is a place of companionship. Also in that same verse, it talks about a helpmate, that we cannot do the difficulties and the challenges of this world alone. And so God created a helpmate for Adam that is comparable to him. So that's where that principle of equal but different comes up. The helpmate was comparable to him. We talk about procreation, that is written as well. And so procreation, having godly children, is really important as well. In the Coptic liturgy of the sacrament of marriage, it talks about fulfilling a divine commandment, again, for the purposes of building small churches and creating a positive society. And then it's also a picture of the relationship of Christ to the church, and that is listed in several verses as well, a picture of the ultimate sacrifice and the ultimate love. There are benefits that have been shown through research for people that are involved in healthy relationships, healthy marriages. Research tells us that people in healthy marriages tend to live longer. They're physically healthier. They have less chances for chronic diseases and pain. Their circulation is improved. High blood pressure is decreased. they have less heart disease, and their memory is improved. They're also mentally healthier. They have greater happiness, greater confidence, greater use of their strengths, a greater sense of security, and stress, again, because of those biblical things that were just mentioned. So they feel a sense of security and happiness and are able to recover better and quicker from illnesses, and they're able to take care of themselves and avoid risky behaviors. And thus, generally, they live a more peaceful life despite the ups and downs of life. And also, it provides a place of cooperation so that they do not feel alone, which again was mentioned all the way back in Genesis 2. But there is a responsibility here, and the responsibility is for both people in that home. That's why we are crowned as Copts, as kings and queens of our home. You are creating a stable upbringing for godly children, and they have a role to work together. They are commanded to work together, and this is a contract with God that should not be broken. This is also a privilege and protection from a secular world, and it again creates a perfect vision of God's love and God's sacrifice. And there should be an intimacy and a connection with your spouse that is like no other, that is not breakable by any outside force. So the hallmarks of a healthy Christian marriage is, of course, Christ is the center. There's love and commitment and loyalty. There has to be humility and forgiveness, not rigidity and a lack of forgiveness, because that sometimes becomes a difficulty. There has to be patience and honesty and trust, selflessness and sacrifice, generosity with things like your time, and having similar goals and a similar vision. There should also be continual growth, both individually and together, and supporting the other person to grow to their best self and the best spiritual self. There should be, again, communication, problem solving, friendship, and intimacy on several different levels, which we'll talk about today. Marriage is not a place where there is a power differential. One person's trying to take power from the other person. Again, it's supposed to be comparable helpmates. It is not a place where someone should be unhappy or a place of an imbalance, of being unequally yoked. It's, again, not a place of rigidity or stubbornness, but flexibility and finding solutions together. And so a wise man here models Christ's love for the church, and a wise woman models who Christ died for in a good functioning church. So in a marriage, we should be fighting for that relationship, not in that relationship. So you should have collective goals together that you are working towards. So some of the barriers that we see that are prevent us from having godly marriages are things like selfishness or a fear of all kinds of intimacy. And we'll talk about the different kinds of intimacy here shortly. If people are not on the same page with things like spirituality or even finances, or how to rear the children, or household chores and duties, all these things can create difficulties that seem small, but they come back larger and larger all the time. Sometimes there's a sense of apathy in that relationship, and the marriage is work, and so it needs to be nurtured, because what we don't nurture will not grow. We have to pay attention that we're not paying attention to incorrect models. We have to pay attention to healthy, godly models. And we sometimes have a poor understanding of what forgiveness means. Forgiveness is about not saying that what you did is okay and we're letting it go and all of those things. It's more about letting God come into that situation and to heal that problem, or to heal that relationship. Not that your hurt doesn't mean anything, or your hurt is something that you should ignore, but it just means that you're going to let God deal with it. And the forgiveness is loosening the chains that are tied around you when we don't forgive another person. And so letting God deal with that other person and the hurts that they caused. And there's tons of research about the benefits of forgiveness. It does not absolve the other person. It's not as if that problem has suddenly disappeared. It just means we're letting God handle it, and we're going to try to find a way to move forward. So some of the problems that we see in marriages, it starts from things like infidelity, again, differences in values or beliefs, a lack of communication, differences in life stage issues. One person may be in a different stage in their life than others. Like one may be exploring career and may be exploring raising the family, and the other person is far away from those things and thinking of something else. So differences in life stages can cause some issues as well. If one person experiences traumatic issues, we can often see that that takes a toll on the entire family. And so it has to be not just their problem, but finding a way to deal with the traumatic life experiences so that it does not impact the rest of the family. Sometimes we see that everyday stressors become big stressors. So what people often tend to do is just put their heads in the sand and pretend there's no problem and I'm not going to deal with it until it becomes too big to deal with. Some people are too stubborn or they lack sacrifice in their relationships. And some people are sacrificing everything and the other partner is sacrificing nothing. That can create a lot of problems as well, because then again, you are unequally yoked. So there may be, again, different values with finances. One spends a lot, one doesn't spend at all. One wants to discipline the kids in a very strict way, the other one's more loose. Again, household duties, all of these things and the lack of cooperation together can create some problems. So ask yourself, what kind of things do you do? Do you shut down and walk away when there's a conflict, or do you try to discuss it? At some point, you have to discuss it. You don't have to discuss it when things are heated. You could take some time and think about it, but tell the other person of a time that you will talk to them. So let's say today there's a conflict on a Friday. You can say, we can discuss this on tomorrow afternoon, or we can discuss it Sunday afternoon. Give me a few minutes or a couple days to think about it, rather than just shutting down and walking away and not telling the other person, making them feel abandoned. Do you get defensive rather than looking at yourself when your spouse points something out to you? Do you get defensive, or do you try to work on that issue and listen to where the problem is? Do you turn into your pain and try to understand what it's trying to tell you, or do you bury it and again walk away? Can you identify your feelings during an argument? Do you know how to resolve your issues, or do you tend to just bicker back and forth? Or do you pull things from 5 years ago when there was a problem and it was never resolved, so it keeps coming back up? We have to find a solution and work towards that solution. And then are you your authentic self, or do you feel like you walk on eggshells around your partner, afraid to say anything or afraid to express yourself openly because you are afraid of their reaction? You should be able to express yourself openly as long as you're doing so in a respectful and kind manner. And are you afraid of rejection or judgment or a lack of understanding in your relationship? Again, all of these are signs that there's need for potential one-on-one help with this couple to help them to get on the same page and communicate a little bit better. Because again, it's inevitable that there's going to be a problem, but how do you repair from that problem? So when they've done tons of research over decades, these two researchers are a husband and wife team. They're from the Gottman Institute, and they've done decades worth of research on things that will destroy or at least break apart a relationship. And on the left there, they've seen all the things that these are the things that keep coming up that contribute to difficulties in relationships up to the point of that relationship breaking apart. So, and then on the right, there are some antidotes that we can try that can help us to not apply these negative things into our relationships. So oftentimes they saw that relationships that end up not in a good place or breaking up are relationships that are very, very critical of one another. They're not finding anything positive in their spouse, in their partner, and they're constantly verbally attacking them or their personality or their character. So instead, it's important to talk about, your feelings and what is happening that is causing you to feel a certain way rather than attacking your partner. Another thing that they have found is that people that feel contempt towards their partner and they intend to insult them or abuse them in some way, and they don't appreciate them and they're not kind towards them, again, that creates some problems as well, because there's a lack of understanding, a lack of that compassion we talked about. And instead, we should build a culture of appreciation. Look for the positive qualities in your partner and help to find, in that gratitude, find ways to have positive corrective actions of things that we need. So even in simple things, we've seen couples fight over the simplest things that are not really that simple because they have deeper meaning. Let's say you've asked your spouse a million times to take out the garbage, but they haven't taken it out. Yes, it seems like a small thing to take out the garbage, but the person who's asking is feeling that the other person that is not responding isn't hearing them, isn't seeing anything that they're telling them. And yes, it's something small. I can take out the garbage myself or something like that. But it's the point of I keep asking and you're not listening. You're not taking my request into consideration or seeing it as important. And likewise, the spouse that's asking should be wondering, why is it this person not listening? Are they tired? Did they have a long day at work and I'm asking them after work? Is there something else I can do to help to negotiate this, negotiate the duties of the house, rather than constant criticism and you always do this and you never do that. The other thing that happens is that couples become defensive. Maybe one of the spouses is telling the other spouse something that they need to change in their relationship for that relationship to improve. And the spouse that's hearing this doesn't hear what needs to be improved. All they're thinking about is saying they're the victim and they perceive everything that is being said to them as an attack. Now, sometimes it can be an attack. You could be really attacking this other person, but sometimes, at least in the initial times when somebody's asking something over and over and over, they're asking for something to change or to improve. But the other person is putting up this defense and it's none of it's getting through. And so there's no building, there's only demolishing that is happening here. And so a person, when they hear something from their spouse, as long as it's being said respectfully and kindly, they should take responsibility for what is happening and work to improve at least their side of it, because it takes two to improve things. And finally, if one spouse is not being heard over and over and over again, like in the taking out the trash example, the person that's been asking for decades or years or months or whatever it is starts to avoid conflict by building a wall to protect themselves because they're tired of asking, they're not being heard, everything feels dark and gloomy because nobody's understanding what I'm saying. So they create a separation and a distance by building a wall between them and their partner. And so there's a lack of communication here, and it doesn't happen from one or two incidences. It happens from things over and over and over again that are not being heard. And so another more antidotes that you can do to resolve some of these things is to be vulnerable with your spouse and saying what is hurtful, what is painful, what is not getting through. Be transparent with them and don't hide things from them, especially financial things that can create a lot of difficulty as well. When something has gone wrong, take accountability for your actions and communicate how it will improve. And oftentimes when I talk to families in general, we talk about having family meetings so that everybody is on the same page. You can do this a couple times a month, maybe once a week even. This is the same reason we have meetings at work, so that everybody's on the same page, the policies of your agency or wherever you're working, and everybody's on the same page. There's no surprises. So we can have family meetings to bring up some of these issues as they occur so they don't build up over time and create issues. So, oops, not sure why it stopped sharing. Bear with me a second. Okay, there we go. All right, so moving on to the next slide. The reason that this does not happen very well, though, is that we live in a very busy world. We are doing so many things, a million things a week, a million things a day, both as dads and moms. We are juggling, our families, our kids, their sports, our own meetings, our own work. There's so much going on. And so we are overscheduled. There are so many roles and duties that we hold. Women tend to be able to multitask better, but that makes them tired. It makes them break down emotionally. And men can even check out when they're depressed and stressed. So it's really important to talk about the issues that we have as they come up, because we don't want the stigma of I'm too stoic to get help, or I don't need any help, I can just fix this on my own. We need to be able to discuss those roles together. And so define goals together, and not just trying to maintain a certain image on the outside that other people will see when on the inside things are breaking down. So we need to have better communication, both in our spirituality and both with our spouse. We also need to have balance in our lives. Sometimes, and oftentimes, I've shown this already in the first couple slides, we will focus all our attention and energy on one thing, but not on the other. Sometimes we'll focus on, let's say, the professional And we don't focus on our health or our psychological well-being or our spiritual well-being or our personal relationships. But it's important to share both the good and bad, because when we share our joy, it is doubled. When we share our sorrows, it is halved. And again, if our partner is truly a comparable helpmate, they should be able to carry our burdens with us. We're not alone, and double our excitement in our joyous times as well. So let's talk about intimacy specifically. There has to be connection on so many levels. When do we feel disconnected from our spouse? Usually, there is a lack of intimacy in one of the following 5 intimacies I will cover. Usually, the cause is being too busy or not being connected regularly on these intimacy levels that we're going to discuss. There has to be honesty, there has to be trust. You have to be able to speak the truth in love and speak about where the areas of pain and difficulty are. And so, in order, these are the types of intimacies we should build. Oftentimes, we think the last one, physical intimacy, will cure everything. It's important. It's very important. There's a reason it's on that list, but that should be at the pinnacle when there has been other work that is done before that that will make us reach the top of that mountain and that pinnacle. So it is not the only fix. There has to be other areas that are fixed first as well, and then by then you will reach the peak of in that regard. And so, first of all, we have to build a spiritual intimacy. We have to have a connection with God first in the marriage, in that relationship, and replace the things that take you away from your spiritual intimacy, whether that is a Bible study, whether it's weekly liturgy, whether it is some sort of struggle that you're struggling with spiritually. Share that weakness and vulnerability with your spouse. It'll build that relationship and give you a way to find solutions together. But you should have spiritual goals together and be patient and persistent in creating those goals. The next thing that we need to focus on is recreational intimacy. Again, the issue here is that oftentimes we're so busy and people are just kind of speaking briefly in the morning, speaking briefly at night. There is no connection. On the weekend, everybody's doing their own thing. There's sports, there's other things that are going on, and there's no recreational intimacy. And so there is importance there as well, because doing fun things together, it's not just about the chores and the work and all the other things that we have to do. There has to be similarities and enjoyment of enjoyable things recreationally together, whether it's a picnic, whether it's a weekend trip. It's something that will help build memories and build intimacy together as well. The next thing is there has to be intellectual intimacy. And this one is really important for both men and women. Sometimes men, enjoy this one a little bit more, but it's about connecting, about discussing certain issues and maybe problem solving together. Sometimes men like to go to the problem solving aspect of things without listening to the emotional aspect of things. And this would be their strong suit then. It's about talking about intellectual topics, and looking at each other's perspective and sharing knowledge and ideas and solutions to the issues that you may be facing. So that could be really, really important as well. And so intellectual intimacy is as important as emotional intimacy, which is the next one, which is discussing emotional experiences and emotional topics and creating an emotional vocabulary. And the women tend to feel more connected when their emotions are connected. So they care when their spouses are saying some struggles that they face from an emotional perspective and not just the intellectual perspective. Both are necessary and both are important for that couple to grow. And if you don't have the vocabulary, that's okay. You can start with this simple chart where you start with emotional words in the middle of how you may feel simple emotions, and branch out to more larger and more deeper and more significant relationship emotions, and how that can apply to improving your relationship. Because sometimes if I don't know what the emotion is, I can't deal with it. I can't focus on it. I can't improve it or change it. And usually when that happens, when people are not dealing with their emotion, it usually turns into the mad, rage, hateful, critical category there in red. All right, so pay attention to your emotions. They are important. It's important to establish a vocabulary of this so that you can communicate it with your spouse. Once you have met all of those other criteria, then the physical intimacy will come more naturally. And humans need physical contact. It needs to be done delicately and with consent, not in a vindictive way. It can be even in a simple way. But the other intimacies are kind of the building blocks that lead up to this becoming fulfilling for both spouses. Because when you have built those other intimacies, you have built things like trust and sacrifice and love and respect. And so this is the next more natural step that comes after that. Again, intimacy should not be something that is overpowering the other spouse or withholding from the other spouse, a place of resentment or fear or no communication or no respect. There's a place of freedom, but a place of a language that you both understand each other. And it's not a place of revenge or a place where there, again, is no service or trust, but it is a place where you're both communicating on the same level and understand one another. And it's the true definition of what God has meant by one, and that there is no more you and I, but there is we. It's an expression, physical expression of your true, trustworthy, loving relationship. So in order to promote those 5 steps of intimacy, you need to communicate what you want for intimacy out of that relationship, what area is missing. Maybe it's recreational. Maybe you're both working all the time and there's no recreational activities whatsoever. Maybe it's one of the other ones. You're not discussing anything. You're not doing a Bible study, or you're not doing reading a book together in order to grow. And so you have to express to your spouse which one you think is missing and how you can work to increase it. You have to agree together as one flesh to improve those areas of your life. And you can seek counseling from your father of confession or actual counseling to help you to figure out compromises. You should nurture all 5 areas of intimacy and lean on positive Christian models, and not to be discouraged, but to keep trying and communicating until it becomes more seamless. That doesn't mean that there's going to be, even if you've been married 50 years, there could still be some conflict at some point, but it's about how you rebuild and how you communicate. That is what matters. Okay, their conflict will be there, but again, it's how you rebuild and how you communicate. That is what matters. Okay. We can also build trust that lasts by creating small moments. And people often, when they've done research again with the Gottmans, they've noticed that people that have these micro moments of connection and it is ignored by the other spouse, that is ultimately what causes a breakdown over years and decades of marriage. And so your spouse may be, throwing out these little moments of needing to connect, but if the other partner is not picking up on it or reacting to it, that is where the problems may arise. And so it's not, death by one paper clip, it's death by one paper cut. It's death by 1,000 paper cuts. So one paper cut will do you no damage, but if you have 1,000 of them, it starts to create a problem. And so to build trust, there needs to be relationship boundaries, and we can have an entire discussion and lecture just on boundaries. But basically, this is what you are allowing in or allowing out of you in order to feel respected in that relationship. You should feel that your partner is reliable. When you call on them, they will be there. Now, that doesn't mean you call them in the middle of an important meeting and expect them to be there. But overall, throughout your relationship, they should be reliable and easy to count upon. When there is a mistake made, there should be accountability and apologizing and trying to fix it. Your partner should be a vault. This is something that you tell them something and you trust they're not going to go blab it to their friends or to their relatives. Instead, you're going to respect this person's information and find a way to help them find a solution. There should be integrity in your relationship, finding courage over comfort, and practicing your values, not just saying your values, and being non-judgmental if your partner is struggling with something and they come to you openly and honestly and vulnerably with something to help you to deal with that issue with non-judgment. And finally, your partner needs to be generous with their time. They need to be generous with everything, generous with their emotions and their thoughts and their feelings, and generous with their time, and generous with being open about the problems that they're facing. So generosity is really important as well. So trust is built based on this acronym of braving. The role of a husband has different roles. The wife has different roles. The roles of the husband is to love and cherish as Christ loved the church, to nourish your spouse, to be a leader, and to know your wife and to see her and to be kind to her, and obviously to honor and to respect her. And so being as Christ loved the church and sacrificed for it. A wise woman, a wise wife builds many balance in her life. And you can see that throughout Proverbs 31, balance in terms of how she serves God and respects her marriage and mothers the children and managing her own health and the health of her family, being of service to others, managing finances and spending wisely, being an important being able to work diligently in and outside of the home if she decides to work outside the home, to use her time wisely, and to have reflection of the of beauty of Christian values and Christian beauty. And so again, that is listed in Proverbs 31. Here are all the different things that the Bible talks about. So the husband will love and lead and provide. The wife will help to manage and to love the home, and together the two are better than one. And I love this breakdown of the verse of the two becoming one flesh. It shows a sense of maturity. They are transitioning from their homes of origin to become a new family and to complement one another. And they are inseparable. They become as one flesh, which is a deep intimacy and connection between two people. So again, in healthy relationships, there is equality, but they are different. But both partners are working towards things like accountability, safety, honesty, support, cooperation, and trust. And this is truly what creates a sense of respect in the home. And if there are things here that are missing, then there's things that need to be worked on. For example, vulnerability and transparency. That's also really important in the relationship. Anything that is not nurtured will not grow. You have to make time for the family together. You have to approach problems open-mindedly, not defensively. We have to communicate. We have to see what our role is and problem solve together towards a common vision and goal. And so we need to spend time with God to be able to do that, to prioritize our family at the top there. Sometimes people put their family all the way at the bottom after everything else that we have to do, work and laundry and grocery shopping and sports. And then we put the family at the end and wonder why it's not growing. We have to evaluate our stressors. Where are our stressors coming from? And how can we tackle those one at a time until we fix them? Connect with each other and communicate effectively is going to be really important as well. I won't go too much into the 24 character strings because we've talked about them before, and there's another lecture up that Father has on this topic. But basically, these character strengths are in every individual that around the world, regardless of where they're from or what country they're in or whatever it is, because it's the strength of our positive traits in our personality and in our character. And so it's important to focus on what are my top character strengths and how can I use those to help lead my family, and the same for my spouse. So these are the ultimate paths to virtue because they help us to communicate and connect with each other across the world and across our home and across our living rooms. They are the ways to connect to each other because it helps us to become more focused on what our positive traits are, not just focusing on what's the negative in myself and my partner. So here they are again. We also have to know our emotions. Again, if we don't know what our emotions are, then we can focus on at least these first initial core emotions and then branch out from there. That can be a real big issue as well. Here they are again in that same wheel. And you can even show the chart on the left to your children so they can name their emotions. We also have to know our needs. Our needs are really, really important as well. And we all want to reach the top of this pyramid, being the most self-actualized, best version of ourselves. We want to be the most moral and the most creative and the most intellectually spontaneous and all of these great things, but we can't do it without all the other needs below it being met. That means we have to have our food, shelter, water needs met. We have to feel like we belong to other people. We have to feel like we are loved and safe. And then that builds our self-esteem. And then that builds our ability to be the best that we can be. So which need of these are missing in your family? Is it a sense of safety, a sense of belonging? Is it my self-esteem? Knowing your needs is really helpful as well. We also have to acknowledge and validate and understand our partner by when they say something to us and communicate, again, we're not listening to respond or to be defensive or to say, but this or this. Instead, listen to where their pain is coming from, where their hurt is coming from, and validate their emotions and try to understand where they're coming from. So when they're talking to you about something, listen and appreciate what they're saying just for what it is without becoming defensive. And then you can respond accordingly because you've heard everything that they said from an empathetic perspective. How do you react when there is a problem? Do you balance things out, or do you fly into a rage and not try to resolve that problem? Is there an alternative for your behavior? Again, with communication, it is a way of engaging with others and understanding their thoughts, their feelings, their opinions, their goals, and it involves a give and take. It is just like a window. If a window is not very, it has dust on it and all these things, you're not going to be able to see to the other side. So your communication needs to be clear and concise and able to help you to see what the other person's perspective is. So effective communication is a two-way street. You let the other person finish without interrupting. You don't just jump in and fix or rescue or counter argue with them. Instead, you should be listening without interrupting. Rather than just preaching at them or judging them or interrupting them, none of those things are helpful. Instead, we should manage that our body language is also part of our communication. Almost 80% of our communication is nonverbal. So your body language is going to show what your emotions are trying to show as well. But there also could be, an importance to speaking correctly in a way that is assertive. So that way you're focusing on both their needs and your needs. If you're only focusing on your own needs, then you're going to become aggressive. If you're only focusing on their needs, it's going to become passive, but passive can turn to aggressive later on. So instead, you need to be more assertive, firm in what you're saying, but also respectful and compassionate and kind and all those kinds of things. So the steps for positive communication is to communicate often, to listen to what the other person is trying to say, both in words, feelings, and body language. Try to create a common goal that you want to work towards. You're fighting against the problem, not each other. Find ways to praise and compliment them. Find ways to figure out what their character strengths are and praise that. Figure out what their needs are. If they're asking you to take out the trash for the millionth time, it's both about the trash not being taken out and about the fact that you haven't heard them the million times they've said it before. Again, learn to forgive. Pick your battles. It doesn't mean that it's okay what they did, but it means that you are letting it go for the benefit of your own mental health and letting God take care of this problem and deal with it. So it doesn't mean that that person is absolved or that it is not a big deal. Of course, it's a big deal if it hurts you. Okay. And so remembering who this person is that you're communicating with. This is supposed to be your partner, supposed to be your spouse. So be respectful and kind. Again, don't throw, negative things at them, and instead stick to the issue that you're trying to figure out and work on. So this is basically the same thing, being empathic and sticking to the communication. Be clear, concise, concrete. Convey all the ideas that you want to talk about, but tackle 2 or 3 at a time. Don't try to tackle a million problems at a time. That's not going to work. Be considerate of your spouse, be polite with them, and feel that connection that ultimately is the ultimate goal. Again, your body language needs to match your words, but mostly you have to maintain eye contact and encourage that person, because that will help bring you closer and move closer to that intimacy that we have been talking about, even if there are triggers or there are difficulties or whatever. If it gets too heated or it's getting a little bit disrespectful, tell each other you're going to take a break, but also tell each other when you're going to come back and discuss this again, when you've had a chance to both cool off and think about things more clearly in your own mind. Okay. So it's okay to take a break and to cool off, but always tell the other person when you're going to come back. That's going to be really important as well. So oftentimes when there are arguments, and this is a really important slide because oftentimes all we see is the issues. And the top of an iceberg is pretty big, but the bottom of the iceberg is so much bigger. So what is underneath the surface is going to be the biggest issues. There are things like our personality, our emotions, our interests, our needs, our desires, our self-esteem, and our perception of ourselves and others, our hidden expectations that we're not discussing, and any traumas or difficulties from the past are hiding just beneath the surface. And the more intense it gets, and things that people don't want to discuss, those are buried down deeper and deeper and deeper, but they're still affecting this argument about taking out the trash. And that's why it becomes explosive over something that seems so simple and so insignificant. It's truly not insignificant, especially if it's been repeated over and over again. So maybe in their unresolved issues in the past, they felt unheard by parents, by colleagues, by somebody else. But now you're the one that's not hearing them. It brings out all those old difficult issues. So consider all of those things: personality, emotions, needs, self-esteem, hidden expectations, and unresolved issues from the past, even in the smallest and tiniest argument, or what seems smallest. And also, before you talk, listen. Before you react, think. Before you criticize, wait. And before you pray, forgive. And before you quit, we need to try. All right, I'm going to unshare here for a second because I want to pull up a couple other slides about our love languages. But while I'm doing that, if people want to ask a couple questions while I'm switching over, let me know, and then we'll come back to discuss some more in just a couple seconds.
Yeah, please, if you have questions, put them in the chat, and then we'll try and cover some of them at least at the end of the presentation. So if you have some questions, then add them to the chat.
Or you can unmute while I'm pulling up this other piece and ask out loud if you wish.
Sure.
Any questions?
Don't be afraid to ask.
Yeah, it's a good opportunity while I'm pulling this up. I thought it was in this slideshow, but it seems to have gotten left out. So I'm gonna.
I've just turned on unmute yourself. So you can unmute yourself if you want to now.
Yeah.
There's been a lot in the presentation so far, and we are recording it, and I'll put it up on our YouTube channel, and it will certainly be worth going through it again. I certainly will, to try and pick up some of these points.
Any questions? I'm nearly done transferring these, and then I'll be able to share again here shortly.
Someone asks, may I ask about having difficulties outside and then your spouse having to help you with them, and yet if you are stressed, they could bear that burden again? You have difficulties outside and then your spouse is helping you with them, and yet if you are stressed, they could bear that burden again.
So basically both partners are stressed for different reasons is what I'm understanding?
I think so, yes.
So if they're stressed for different reasons, we don't want to let those stressors come inside our home or inside of our relationships, but we can also support our spouse through the difficulties that they're going through. So let's say you're having stressors from other family members or from a work situation. Don't let that stressor impact your relationship, but your spouse can help you come up with solutions to take back to work, or to put boundaries between you and that other family members or things like that, that could be creating some issues as well. So it's really important that the support is there, but not at the same time, not allowing you to having that create a rift in your own relationship, because the stressors are so overwhelming. So take care of the stressors that are at work, either by creating boundaries or, going to therapy or something like that, that can help you figure out how to problem solve. Don't let that become a rift in your relationship.
I guess, as you say that, Dr. Christine, there's the possibility that instead of having our spouse become a partner with us, part of a team dealing with this external threat to our marriage, the partner gets sucked up into all of these external problems, and the partner becomes almost part of the problem, instead of allowing the partner to become part of the solution.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
There was just one other question. How do we deal with our differences in backgrounds, way of thinking, and points of view? Because these can sometimes be obstacles in the relationship. Many of the people in our church are marrying people from other cultural backgrounds, other religious backgrounds, Christian religious backgrounds. How do we deal with some of those differences?
Yeah, and so that becomes an issue as well if it's going to be a place where, again, there's some unequal yoke things. So that's something that should be discussed. If you can prior to the marriage. If you're already in the marriage, you need to find a similar goal or a similar point of view that you can start from and develop and build from there. Because the issue will become is one person will go to church on the Sunday and the other person says, I don't want to go. And then that continues, as that relationship, it continues, that rift becomes bigger and bigger and bigger. So if you can find at least one place of common ground, which is obviously the reason that you did get married to begin with, that should be your focal point for both of you to start to grow from there, as opposed to I'm doing my thing and you're doing your thing. And then we find that there is a major space in between us where we can't diverge. We instead, kind of separate from each other, which is not a beneficial thing at all.
Fantastic. Thank you.
So I'm going to share my screen, just a few more slides. I just think that this is kind of important as well. And like I said, I thought it was in my slides initially, but it was not. So we've talked about resilience before. This is an important characteristic here about resilience is not about the absence of difficulty. It is a conscious choice to experience the full spectrum of the emotions that we have across our marriages, individually, with our children, throughout our life. It's not that we're stuffing down our emotions. That does not help. It only makes the problem come back later, bigger, and much more difficult to solve. So yes, it's about experiencing the full spectrum of human emotions, but not to be consumed by them. Instead, it's really important as a family to come together as a unit. And this verse is very powerful from Timothy about the importance of family, that anyone that does not provide for their relatives and the members of their own house has denied the faith and is worse than a non-believer. So families are very, very important. And there are examples of families in the Bible, Noah and the Holy Family going to Egypt, and even for Cornelius listed in the book of Acts. And Joshua said, as for me and my household, we will serve the Lord. And so families that are resilient are able to create things together that make them resilient. They have a meaning and a purpose for their family. Again, like Joshua said, the members of my household, me and my house will serve the Lord. They have a positive outlook. Even when things are difficult, they're able to kind of find ways to maneuver around those challenges like we talked about in the beginning. Spiritually, they are connected to something larger than themselves. And sometimes we don't know how to solve these problems. And so God needs to intervene, and we need to be connected and have faith that even when things seem completely bleak and the doors are all closed, that God will find a way. Families are connected to each other. Imagine how much time Noah and his family spent in that ark. We have an exhibit here in the US that is of the ark. My children and I went to it this summer. And my family and I went there, and it was remarkable how big this ark is. It was built to scale from the ark in the Bible. It's in Kentucky in the US. And so this family must have been connected. It showed how they worked together to do everything from feeding the animals to, what if problems arose in the ark, how they dealt with it. And so, yes, some of this is meditation and meditating on, the story of Noah, but we have to be connected. When there is a problem, when there is a difficulty, connect to each other rather than separate. That is usually the biggest issue, is that people don't come together, they go their own way. There has to be flexibility, social supports that will help you, clear communication, and problem solve together with emotional connectedness. So here are the 5 love languages, and this is what I wanted to kind of show and kind of end with here. We all have a way that we communicate and understand love in a relationship. There are 5 of them, and there's a free quiz that you can take online. This is a study done by psychologist Gary Chapman about how we communicate and receive love from other people. This again can be applicable to use with children. It can be applicable to use with your parents, with other friends and things like that. But, and there's been books that he's written about different topics in the love languages. But how do you receive love and how do you give love? Some people feel very loved if somebody gives them an act of service. If your spouse runs to the grocery store after you've had a hard week without you even telling them and gets back groceries and brings them home, that really shows that spouse that they love them. Okay. Again, it may not seem like a big deal, but they decided to go to the grocery store instead of you, knowing that you've had a tough week and that you're tired. But again, those little micro moments, if somebody ignores them time and time and time again, that's what creates an issue. Some other people feel really loved when they get gifts. If your spouse suddenly surprises you with something, it could be a $5, 5-pound item or a $100 item. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter the cost, but it shows that you're thoughtful and thinking of them. Some people feel loved when there's physical touch, even a hug or holding hands. And that shows that they are loved. Even some kids that way, when they get agitated, all they want is a hug, and they need that attention to feel like they're supported. Other people will feel loved if they give quality time or they receive quality time. So you've had a long week, but you've decided to sit down and have a Bible study or watch a movie with your spouse. Then you're doing something together and spending quality time or taking them to dinner. And then other people feel loved when they receive words of affirmation. Your spouse is telling you you're doing a great job, you're a great mom, you're a great dad, you're doing excellent things. And so there's a quiz that you can take online that can help you understand what your specific love language is. And then you can ask your spouse to take it too, and you can show them, this is the way I feel appreciated and loved. And they can say, this is the way I feel appreciated and loved. And finding a way between the two of you to give each other the love that they need in the language that they understand. Here's a quick thing that you can do for each of the love languages. You can, I'll pause here for a minute so you can kind of take this in. But again, knowing what your love language is and having your spouse give you that love language is so important. All of us, believe it or not, have the importance of all 5, but they're categorized as most important to least important. So for some people, let's say gifts is the least important. It's still important, but maybe you just need, a gift at your birthday and you're good. But more every day, you need words of affirmation. You need somebody to encourage you or to spend 5 minutes with you or to run to the grocery store because you're tired. So knowing what your child's or spouse's love language is, make sure that you're giving them in a language that they understand. So if you keep giving them gifts, but that's not their love language, it's going to fall on deaf ears. Okay. Not necessarily intentionally. But lastly, what do we do if our partner is not a Proverbs 31 wife or a Christ-centered husband? Our safety is the most important. So hopefully there is nothing abusive going on there. If there is, you need to get support around that issue as immediately as possible. So safety first, because our safety, mental and physical, is very important and very important to God. Other than that, if there is some glitches that we need to work on, we need to learn from others and get assistance from people that can help you. Professionals, your priest, your father of confession, and you should still be doing your role anyway, because your contract is with God. Again, putting the safety issue aside, that's the most important here, but we should also maintain our contract with God. Help yourself by getting help from others, seeking help from a mentor, and keep communicating and cultivating resilience. A resilient family expresses gratitude. They know their strengths and use them. They savor when there are good experiences because you can bank that in your mind. Examine your own stories of resilience. Examine ways to use positive emotions and be kind to others as well. Here's an example of what resilience couples look like. They don't run away from a problem. They confront it, but they confront it together. They're able to reframe their thinking and have hope. They understand each other and don't get defensive. They practice empathy. They help each other relive good news. Do you remember when we were like this 5 years ago? Can we get back to that place? And they confront and comfort each other during places of transition, because transition can bring on grief and trauma and difficulties and challenges, but they connect more during those challenges, not separate from one another. We've talked about spiritual resilience before, so I'll move on. But marriage is basically a sacred bond between two imperfect people, made possible by a perfect God, held together with limitless love, unshakable faith, undying devotion to one another. And here are 10 things that you can do together to express and make your marriage stronger. Obviously, pray together and for each other. Show those love languages. Accept each other. Remember your blessings. Nurture your relationship. Create time for each other. Pray as a family. Read the Bible as a family. And most importantly, forgive one another, because love covers a multitude of sins. Here's some resources, and you can also find those on my website. Thank you. Now we could take some more questions.
Thanks very much, Dr. Christine. There is one more question here straight away. Thank you for your insightful presentation. I would like to ask you regarding your perspective on the Big Five personality traits and their potential application in the context of marriage.
Very good question. So the Big Five personality characteristics, you can remember them by the acronym OCEAN. So one is openness to new experiences. The C stands for conscientious in your relationship. We can have an entire presentation just on this. The E stands for extroverted versus introverted personality. The A stands for agreeableness, and the N stands for neuroticism, which is a measure of anxiety. So we all fall on a continuum on all five of these. And there are other personality factors, but this one has been extensively studied over the last 30 or 40 years or so, since the 80s, I would say, maybe even a little bit earlier into the 70s. And so it's very extensively researched. But if you think about it, someone who is more open to new experiences, if they're married to someone else who's open to new experiences, they'll be able to problem solve together. If someone is conscientious, that means they pay attention to their spouse's details. And if their spouse is saying something, again, it's not the death by 1,000 paper cuts. They're paying attention to those micro moments so they don't have the excessive paper cuts, let's say. If someone is agreeable, then during an argument, they'll be amenable to hearing what their spouse says and how they can grow from this situation. If one person's very extroverted and the other person's very introverted, that may create an issue where one wants to go out with their friends and family all the time, and the other one's perfectly okay at home. So where do you find a balance in that regard? And the neuroticism one, again, is a measure of anxiety. If someone's very anxious and worried and concerned about everything under the sun, and the other person is not, again, where do you find the balance in those things? So you can, again, take a measure that tells you where you fall on those things. But ultimately, we are on a continuum. You want to create a little bit of balance between you and your spouse in those areas, for sure.
Anyone else with a question at the moment that you want to add to the chat, or unmute yourself and ask? I wish I'd heard this presentation 30 years ago. I'm sure my wife does as well. When she listens to it later, I'm sure she'll have some interesting feedback for me.
And that's a good word. Feedback is a good word.
Yeah, that's right.
Arguing or bickering or anything like that. So feedback is a great term.
Just as I say that, I'm just thinking, because I'm thinking of obviously my own experiences, when we receive feedback from our spouse, because we are very close with one another, that can produce very strong emotions and reactions, and it can trigger things that are completely unrelated, but in our own experience as children even, and I'm just thinking how I do have the power within myself, with God's help, to decide how I am going to respond to that feedback, I guess. Yeah. What would you say about that? I don't have to always respond in the wrong way. I can learn to respond in the right way. What would you say about that?
Right. So again, from that Gottman research, people that come back defensively tend to contribute to little cracks in the foundation, because you're not hearing the feedback. right? So the feedback should be done in a respectful, kind, compassionate manner. And this is why we tell couples oftentimes to use I statements. When I've asked you to take the trash out several times and that doesn't happen, I feel like you're not hearing me. I feel like you've neglected my needs. I feel like I'm not being heard or seen in this relationship. It's very different than, I can't believe you didn't take the trash out again. How could you? This is terrible. You're a terrible person, X, Y, and Z, and continue from there. So it's the same problem, taking out the trash, but it's how you verbalize it. And the other person doesn't need to come back defensively. Obviously, if the other person is saying it in a rude and, disheartening manner, they're going to come back in rude and disheartening manner as well. But if they're truly listening to what their spouse is saying as feedback, then you can say, wow, you know what? You have asked me 10 times to take out the trash, and that is disrespectful that I haven't heard you. They're not coming back defensively. They're coming back with, I'm going to try to work on this.
Yes.
At least 2 to 3 times a week, I will take out the trash.
Yes.
Does that work for you? Maybe they'll say, no, we need it 4 times a week. And then you work on negotiating at that point. So again, it's a very simple example, but has very deep meaning underneath it.
Yeah. And also the willingness to receive that feedback as something positive. I guess if we sit with our spiritual father and he says, I think you're being a bit lazy about something, if we are there genuinely with our spiritual father, we will say, thanks for helping me to see that. I can also have that attitude with my wife, I guess. Maybe not saying those same words, but I can see her feedback as something entirely positive, and it doesn't have to be something that I respond defensively with at all, because we are working together to improve both of ourselves, aren't we? And so even feedback that makes me feel bad, I should have taken the trash out, that can be a positive thing, can't it, instead of being a negative thing?
Right. And like Buna, you said, it could come from things in our childhood. Maybe in the past when people have told us to do things, it felt like an attack. So now this feels like an attack when it's not meant to be an attack.
Yes.
So processing it that way is really important also.
Yes. Thank you so much, Dr. Christine. This is going to be a presentation that we've all benefited from, and many other people will benefit from watching the recording. We're very grateful to God that He has brought us into a relationship with you, and we pray that God will continue to bless us through your service, and will bless you and your family in every way, and keep you for us for many years. Dr. Christine will certainly speak to us again, I hope before Christmas, about another topic that will help us in our lives. And perhaps I will just close with prayer now, and then we can go to our own works and places. Heavenly Father, we thank you for all that you have taught us through Dr. Christine at this time. We thank you for the insights that she has been able to share. And we pray that for each one of us watching this evening, and those who will watch the recording, we pray that there will be something for each one of us to apply to our own lives and marriages. We pray that we might be those people who genuinely desire to have fruitful and life-filled and peaceful marriages and relationships with others in our family, so that we are willing to examine ourselves and see how we need to change some of our responses and attitudes. Thank you for the depth and the richness of this presentation. And we pray that perhaps as we watch it again, there will be something that particularly stands out for every individual. We ask you to be with us all in our own families and our own marriages, and help us to find you present with us in every moment. And we ask you to, again, be with Dr. Christine and her own family and her own professional service and spiritual ministry, and that you will hear us now as we lift our voices to you, our Heavenly Father, and pray, saying, Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from the evil one, through Jesus Christ our Lord. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. And this is now where I look carefully. Here we are to pause.